One of the great peculiarities of Japanese living space is that Japanese always remove their shoes before entering into their homes. If we look at other countries, the act of taking off one's shoes or footwear is a behavior usually associated with entering the temple or holy place. But the Japanese have turned this ritual into a part of everyday life. Maybe this is a decisive difference between the lifestyle of Japan and the lifestyle of other countries. Naturally, people sometimes remove their footwear elsewhere too, because it is too hot or simply because it is more practical. There is a pattern you see all over that tropical parts of Asia. However, it is probably only in Japan and Korea that people take off their shoes before stepping onto their homes with the notion that they are entering the sacred ground. This seems to be profoundly related to the Japanese concept of what a home is. Generally speaking, a home is a structure that offers a protection against enemies, wind, rain, and other ravages of nature, and its a family, a group of people live in peace and comfort. In the West, of course, practically all homes are varying according to the basic idea. In Japan, however, I believe that awareness of living on a sacred places that was considered even more important. Even though the way the space was positioned might have been extremely vague, the perception of what was inside and what was outside was perfectly clear because the inside was considered a sacred space. Japanese concept of the sacred space is both relative and gradual. Inside the home, the household, Shinto shrine, and Buddhist altar obviously sacred, but even floor, cushion, and the hearth were a kind of holy domains and boundary area like a threshold, and each of tatami mats too had a certain sanctity attached to them. Seen from the outside, the sacredness increased step by step. Outside and inside the village, outside and inside the wall or a hedge, outside the inside the entranceway, outside the inside the room. Then, again, for more distant features in the landscape like mountains and seas, the relationship between folly and common was reversed. The foreest places are thought to be far away. As a consequence, the house always had to be kept clean to receive any visitors from those faraway sacred lands. Removing one's shoes was a symbol of the cleanliness. You could even turn it around and say that for Japanese, a house is not a place with a roof. A house is a place where you take your shoes off. The open air tea ceremony is a good example. This is a tea ceremony performed on mats spread out outdoors, but before you sit down on the mat, you remove your shoes. In this way, the mat becomes a house. These days, Japanese homes have become slowly westernized, but the Japanese still take off their shoes. This bodily intuition seems to be deeply rooted. In today's information society, it ought to have been obvious that there are many different cultures and each culture has its own set of truths and values. But instead, the very overflow of the information tends to obscure the fact. Just like the uprising in 1968 was a recreation against the modernization after the Industrial Revolution, Now I believe it's time to reconsider the result of the second computer-based industrial revolution, taking a fresh look at the culture of your own land and regions is a good start. The Japanese also like to sit on the floor. Even a Western-style room with a sofa. Japan is a land of forest, and forest people enjoy sitting down on the ground to obscure nature around them and become the one with nature. The act of sitting down like this is, of course, linking to that of removing one's shoes. In China, people normally sat on chairs, but under the influence of Buddhism, the Chinese took to sitting on the floor. However, in China, sitting on the floor was always limited to the religious or spiritual etiquette. In Japan, on the other hand, there was never any particular strict division between religions or spiritual courtesies and everyday life. Etiquette and daily life were both separated and integrated at the same time. For the Japanese, who normally sat on the floor anyway, religious etiquette was just another part of everyday life. When you investigate the roots of traditional Japanese art like no or tea ceremony, they too are a large part that derives from the Asian continent. However, when the tea ceremony was born out of the kind of Chinese tea tasting contest, they're developing the kind of Chinese circus, they both they changed completely. That is to say, they were Japanized. Here, to the Japanese body, sensations of removing one's shoes and sitting on the floor seems to have played an extremely important role, as we can see, and the utensil is used for the tea. While a house might be a place where one tries to pursue an ideal lifestyle, most houses are also brimming with the reality of everyday life. Japanese homes have their origins in ancient pit dwellings and under high-floored houses that developed later with the spread of rice cultivation. The high-floor houses in particular had a profound effect on the living habits of the Japanese. Many of them continue to this day. For example, is a custom of taking off one's shoes before entering the house. As the designer points out for Japan at the beginning, ordinary folks lived mostly in pit dwellings until the Heian period. Houses had an extremely simple structure for a long time. It was only in the Edo period that the dwellings of commoners started to the buildings with floors and separate rooms for dining and sleeping. During the Heian period, an open structure with few interior walls was the standard for residences of the upper class. Later in the Muromachi period, the styles emerged with the tatami mat floors and sliding shoji paper doors, as well as tokonoma alcoves for decorating the reception zone. This may be considered the archetype traditional Japanese house. The tea rooms was later introduced into Japanese residence as the tea ceremony developed more or less during the same period. Until recently, Japanese houses were typically made of wood. In the major period, under the strong influence of Western-style architecture, houses for average people began to appear in a blend of Japanese and Western style. Even so, Japanese-style washitsu rooms with tatami mat dimensions continue to dominate in Japanese homes. However, over the past 50 years, the lifestyle of Japanese people has undergone dramatic changes, and with this, the number of washitsu has greatly decreased from residential space. At the same time, the Japanese houses of the past, which used to have very few things and furnishings, now virtually overflow with all sorts of things. Nonetheless, Japanese still take off their shoes before entering any house, and generally feel more comfortable sitting down floor levels even in Western-style rooms with chairs and sofas.